we're seeing a big push this week in the diplomatic sphere, but it does feel as if there's almost a kind of a pause, a reorganization, a moving of pieces on the board before the next phase of this war starts. I mean, is that fair?
Well, good afternoon, Ruth. Yes, I think so, particularly on the battlefield. Both sides think they can gain in the first half of this year, and the Ukrainians will want to have some sort of decisive result by the end of the year. So any diplomatic efforts towards peace are probably certainly going to fail before there's some sort of decision on the battlefield. Of course, diplomatically as well, there's the issue of the European Union, which is being discussed today. But on the battlefield itself, we are seeing moves. We're seeing the first probes, if you like, of a Russian offensive in the east of the country, which Ukraine will have to resist.
In terms of what that looks like, I mean, there's a very different set of skills, considerations, logistics, etc., between sending missiles to hit centres of people, and whether that's cities or strategic towns, to being able to take and hold ground, though, isn't there? So if Russia does want to take and hold ground, they're going to have to change what happens when the weather changes, and be able to really try and push against weak points.
Yes, that's right. The air campaign that you briefly referred to, or the missile campaign, is an entirely different game than the fighting on the ground. What we're seeing actually today is warfare that's very reminiscent. I know it sounds a cliche, but I'll explain in a sec. Very reminiscent of the First World War. It's an artillery-centered battle without manned air power playing a major role. Drones play a major role, but that is in the context of artillery direction. So what we're going to find over the next few weeks are battlefields, and what we have been seeing, very reminiscent of Verdun, of the Argonne, and of Passchendaele. And if you want to know what all this looks like, you can watch All Quiet on the Western Front, or perhaps towards Crimea now, which is more forested, the Battle of the Bulge episode in Band of Brothers. That's what it's like now. It's winter now. It's -2 today. Over the next few weeks, as you hinted yourself, the weather will get warm, and we will have what they call the Rasputitsa, which will introduce mud into the equation, and both sides will slow down again. So that's the slugging match that we're going to have.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested. So attritional warfare rather than the kind of maneuverous warfare that we saw with Blitzkrieg in the Second World War, etc. I'm really interested about what you said there about the small amount of influence that manned air conflict has had in this, i.e. aircraft, and that was one of the reasons why it's more like World War One. And you know, we've heard from Zelensky that he wants jets, he wants fast jets in the air. Now, I remember 20 years ago now doing my basic training, and week one we were told modern warfare almost impossible to win unless you've got a minimum of air parity, but you always seek to have air superiority. But it doesn't seem as if there's been that many jets in the sky in this conflict.
Dead right, Ruth. Yes, the way we fight depends well, not entirely, but depends primarily, as you know, on having, as you say, at least some element of the control of the air. What we have in Ukraine is something we've never had to suffer since the Second World War, and that is mutual air denial. And that means neither side can get its manned aircraft up in any kind of numbers. It's estimated the Russians can put up about 200 sorties a day, maybe less now, and the Ukrainians less than 20. So just to put that into context, the Royal Air Force today, in a normal training day, normal peacetime day, is putting out way more sorties than the Russians are. So neither side can get their manned aircraft up. So they depend on drones for that reconnaissance facility. But in much the same way, by the way, as we've depended on balloons. I know this, I mean, it's a bit topical, but perhaps not go to China, but we depended on balloons in the same way as the Ukrainians now depend on drones to guide precision artillery in on Russian infantry formations and Russian armored formations, and unfortunately vice versa.
Now, one of the things that attritional warfare was characterised by was the fact that it was slow. You took ground inch by inch, yard by yard, and that actually the front line could be basically static for months or years at a time. And if you're talking about some of these areas in Belgium and in France, where you can go now if you so wish to visit the trench network, you can see how long it was there for.
Exactly, and we're seeing that now around Bakhmut. Over the last 6 months, Russian gains, and have been making gains, have been measured in meters for most of that time. And what we're also seeing, Ruth, in Bakhmut, by the way, again, I'm not going to harp on this First World War analogy because history rhymes, it doesn't repeat. But we have a salient developing now surrounding Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians are going to have to make a decision as to whether they're going to fight on and suffer even greater casualties there or withdraw. Otherwise, they stand to get surrounded in Bakhmut. But we see yesterday, our defense intelligence reported an attack here just about 10 miles southwest of Bakhmut, a place called Vuhledar. And the Russians lost 30 armored vehicles. They sent inexperienced infantry forward in armored vehicles. The infantry abandoned the armored vehicles, presumably under artillery fire, and ran away. So we also see the element of training coming into this. And that's going to be absolutely critical over the next year. And that's why Europe at the political level is putting such stress on this training issue and has been doing so now for the last 4 or 5 months, because that's going to be the edge here, as well as the equipment, of course. But it's training that's the key enabler, as you well know yourself.
Indeed. Now, before I let you go, Frank, let's flash forward. As you say, we've been talking about the echoes of history here. But actually, in terms of what you think the kind of moves and counter moves that we should look out for are, if we're paying attention to this conflict, and we should be, where should we be looking beyond Bakhmut for movements, for insurgency, counterinsurgency, etc.?
You're asking me to speculate, which I'm quite content to do. So looking at what the Ukrainians have said is their centre of gravity this year, and they made this very clear, and they made it very clear on many occasions that their centre of gravity of their war is Crimea, which you yourself mentioned there in the introduction. And in order to have any hope or credibility of moving the Crimea gauge in their direction, they're going to have to cut it off. And that means a strike, and this is my speculation, I'm no privilege, obviously I'm no privileged access, I couldn't share if I did, needless to say, but I would suspect that what we will see the Ukrainians shape up for is a strike in Zaporizhizha province or oblast, down towards the sea to cut Crimea off. The bridge is not properly repaired yet, and even if it was, it can't sustain the whole peninsula of Crimea. And I think that they've declared that as their priority, and I think that's what they will have as their priority this year, if they can make that happen. And I would suspect that the formation of a few armoured brigades, some of them from Western equipment, will be dedicated towards that. Having said that, Russia is not blind to this possibility, and they've put up some pretty impressive defences, which the Ukrainians will have to break through. And there we go back into trench warfare again.